This is my 23rd year in education. I was a high school math teacher.
I was a high school teacher for almost 20 years.
I was a high school English teacher for 15 years.
I have a 9-year-old child.
I myself opted my daughter out of the 10th grade testing.
My son is in 7th grade, and this was the first year that I felt this overwhelming sense of just anger and frustration, and just being really mad about the stress he was under. Where, you know, the first day of ELA, he actually sat by my bed, and he gets up at 6 in the morning, and he's shaking his head, and I'm like, what's wrong, son? What's the matter? He's like, I'm stressed. You know, if I don't pass this test, am I gonna move on to the next grade? Happy one day, next day you take the second part of the test, not so happy, to the last day of the math test when he says, Ma, I think I failed. You know, and that's not okay to be putting our kids through stuff like that, so.
Audit culture and accountability and standards and all the ed reforms under No Child Left Behind were really taking us on a very bad road. Schools of education bought into all of these reforms as a way in their mind to stave off privatization and corporatization, and in the very process opened up the floodgates for those corporations to come into the university.
Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton held hands with Lou Gerstner, the chairman of IBM, and they convinced other business people and political leaders to develop and deliver what was called America 2000 to the first George Bush. And this was a specific program of school reform. When Clinton became president, he wanted a national test. That morphed into No Child Left Behind and then Race to the Top. And with each change in the reform, it's gotten worse.
I saw these reforms affecting teachers everywhere. I saw it affecting teacher education and just turning all of it into the most stripped down, minimalist kind of curriculum and pedagogy you can imagine. And as the years progressed, with the emphasis on testing and quality review and annual progress, more and more teachers and principals understandably felt the pressure to perform so that they could get good grades. And what that did was it shifted the focus away from experimenting and developing curricula and pedagogies that were really appropriate for the kids that we were working with.
For the last 2.5 years, there's been a lot of pushback from the classroom, from the individual teachers that are impacted by additional loss of class time, from the people that are impacted by loss of resources such as the library and the computer labs so that we can give this computer adaptive test.
We've seen an increased amount of prescribed curriculum and scripted curriculum, and unfortunately implemented by principals and others and curriculum writers who don't know early childhood. So there's a pressure on teachers to teach in ways that they don't agree with.
We've done a lot of internal reform, all of it aimed at closing the achievement gap in the school and making sure that every child had equitable opportunities. What's happening is that all of those equity initiatives are being put off to the side in order to comply with a lot of the regulations. You're going to start to see a real resurgence of tracking. We're seeing it now in the elementary levels, where they're dividing kids up because they're, based on their test scores and giving them different curriculum. And what will happen over time is that rather than closing the gap, it's going to actually cause the gap to expand.
My older son left to go to a public middle school where we weren't quite so happy. The semester that the testing happened, his anxiety started rising, and we didn't realize at the time that it was the testing that was really making him anxious. But it was anxious to the point where it was affecting his sleep, his ability to function in school. He was becoming more irritable, more unpleasant to be with. And we decided that year in 7th grade that we just had to pull him out.
In many schools, the curriculum has become test prep, test prep, test prep.
What kinds of people are we producing? It's not people who have as much imagination, as much creativity, individual thinking or original ideas, the capacity to invent new ideas or solve problems, which are all the capacities children naturally do have, but They need to have experiences that reinforce and cultivate those. I'm afraid we're suffocating those capacities.
It benefits corporations such as Pearson to think that schools are failing. For example, Race to the Top, when we got the grant, half of that money immediately went to the creation of a data system, which went to a private corporation. The other half was distributed among schools, but it was going to cost far more to implement the policy than schools will get to implement that policy. So Race to the Top costs schools money, but benefits the corporations that, for example, create the data programs, create the assessments that link to the Common Core.
The worry about Pearson is when it is making decisions about education, it is making decisions for its shareholders. We educate so that people can grow to be citizens of a democracy, which means you need a capacity for empathy, which means you know how to be with all other kinds of human beings and be respectful and talk with them, knowing how to listen. Pearson doesn't share those interests. They are now the largest testing and assessment company in the world. So we have a few people whose primary interest is in profit, determining much of what happens in schools.
I think this is basically a corporate takeover of a public space. And I think if we lie down for that, I think there's no place that will be safe. And I'm even concerned about higher ed. There are certain things that are happening in higher ed that even have us saying, okay, well, how high do you want me to jump?
Unfortunately, what we will lose is the voice of the teacher in the process. Teachers will be at-will employees who can be dismissed at any moment. They will teach in an atmosphere where whatever is requested of them, they will never be able to push back and advocate for their students or for themselves.
Public education should afford all children what the sons and daughters of the wealthy receive. We believe in equal educational opportunity. What ed reformers have done has changed the conversation to focus on this illusory equal educational results, as if the test score gaps will close, as if everything will be taken care of if we just follow what they want us to do.
Parents are circulating stories about the stressed out nature of going to school, about how kids are miserable, how the arts are being marginalized, how your physical education and recess, no time for that. Any parent who looks at their kid and says what they need, one of the things is they need play, they need time off, they need to socialize, they need some artistic experiences. And when those become marginalized, parents are saying, I want to be an activist on behalf of my kid. I don't like this.
I was getting ready to set up the administration schedule of the test. I walked in and talked to one of our teachers and said, so here's what I've set up for your class and for your kids. And her response was basically, again, really? Oh no, not again. And she said, what can we do? I said, well, we could refuse. And she said, great, let's refuse. And then within 24 hours, we had the entire language arts department saying, yes, I refuse. And then within 24 more hours, we had the entire math department saying, yes, let's boycott the test. Within a day after that, we had the entire staff, virtually the entire staff, supporting those of us that were directly impacted. One of the things that gave us the most strength was looking around and knowing we were all on the same page. So we decided to boycott.
To date, no school has ever been shut down because parents opted out of testing. They've been shut down because parents opted in, and they've managed to label them as a failing school as a result of that.
I look at kindergartners and I think, what about them? What sustains me is that I drive through neighborhoods in Brooklyn where my daughter doesn't go to school, and I think about those kids in those classrooms and where are they going to be in 10 years or 12 years. That sustains me. It's too important to me to see fairness and equity in our society, and I think until that day comes, I will always be doing this.
I'm hoping that what my children have learned is that we live in a democracy and that we should all have a voice, that they can take a stand, that they don't have to sit by and quietly take the oppression of the testing or any other kind of oppression.
It's easy to become discouraged right now and pessimistic, but if we don't keep going, then we will totally give up in the face of not just corporatization, but dehumanization.
I love public education far too much, and I love my school far too much to just stand by and watch it be destroyed by bad policies.
As you can see across the country, they're fighting back and standing up, just like, to me, just like the civil rights movement. It was young people that took action. Many movements around the country were young people that said enough is enough, and I don't want to live like this anymore. I want something better.
I hope that the parents and teachers and citizens who intuit that something is wrong start noticing the momentum gaining around the country.
There were certainly times where all of us felt alone. When our jobs were threatened, my job specifically was threatened many times. And so even though I had the support of my entire school, I did feel alone. But what got me over that hump, and what I would say to some of these people is, even when you feel like you're alone, you're not if you step out of your classroom or step into the hallway or step into the school and be willing to have those conversations, because there are other people too that are afraid. And those people will come forward and say, even if it's in a whisper, I'm afraid too, but this is what I want. And then it's 2 people, and then before you know it, it's 4 people, and then it's 20. And so it makes me think that if the conversation like this is going on in so many different places, there must be thousands of people that we don't know about that feel the same way, that want the same thing.
Reclaim the conversation.
Reclaim the conversation.
Reclaim the conversation.
Reclaim the conversation. We can do this!
When small groups of people get together and they talk about this, that's a good thing.